How exactly did a remarkably complex, highly structured, rule-based system like human language first emerge in our early hominin ancestors? For decades, the standard answer relied on the generative paradigm, an approach that treats language as a discrete, specialized biological endowment. Championed most notably by Noam Chomsky, this orthodoxy proposed a universal grammar, a hardwired linguistic framework intrinsic to the human brain. From an evolutionary standpoint, this model requires a relatively abrupt, singular genetic macromutation that specifically rewired our neural circuitry for syntax. Modern linguists like Salikoko Esmefwene argue otherwise. They posit that language is not an isolated, hardwired organ waiting to be switched on. Instead, they approach language as a culturally driven, complex adaptive system, shaped entirely by its users. By examining the phylogenetic evidence, we test the abrupt mutation theory against the gradual repurposing of anatomy, a process biologists call exaptation. This shift from biological design to ecological technology places the burden of language on human culture rather than an automated genetic program. Evolutionary linguist Derek Bickerton proposed a proto-language hypothesis, suggesting early hominins communicated with a limited vocabulary devoid of complex grammar. The difficulty with this timeline is the required biological leap from a simple lexicon directly into complex, rule-bound syntax without clear intermediate steps. To map this evolution, researchers look to the physical architecture of the hominin skull and the supralaryngeal vocal tract. This cross-section compares a Neanderthal's flat vocal tract with the descended larynx of an Upper Paleolithic Homo sapiens. Middle Paleolithic hominins had notably shorter cervical spines, lacking the vertical space for a descended tongue root. Without this chamber, producing precise point vowels is physically impossible. The anatomical structures capable of supporting modern vocal speech do not appear in the fossil record until approximately 50,000 years ago. This anatomical delay suggests that communication among early hominins relied heavily on a gestural framework, well before vocalization took over. Since the vocal apparatus evolved tens of thousands of years after complex hominin tool use, vocal speech could not have been the result of an early, isolated genetic mutation for syntax. If complex communication can be managed through gestures, we have to ask why the Homo genus risked dangerous anatomical reconfigurations, like a descended larynx that increases the chance of choking, just to speak. The answer lies in Peter McNeilige's concept of exaptation, the evolutionary process of co-opting existing structures for entirely new functions. The descent of the larynx originally evolved in mammals as a mechanism to exaggerate physical size to predators and rivals, independent of communication. Similarly, rhythmic jaw oscillations evolved primarily for the mechanical processing and ingestion of food. Over time, these chewing rhythms were exapted to produce what linguists call syllabic variation, the alternating consonant-vowel structures that form the basis of speech. This repurposing extends beyond the physical anatomy into the neurobiology of the brain, directly challenging the search for a localized language organ. This highlights Broca's area, traditionally classified as the dedicated speech center. Modern mapping shows this area actually coordinates broad sensory motor activities. It houses mirror neuron pathways, activating equally for observing physical tool use and the vocal imitation required to learn language. This broad functionality is also reflected in genetics, specifically the FOXP2 gene, which has often been incorrectly popularized as the specific gene for syntax. FOXP2 actually facilitates domain general learning and precise motor control across multiple species, playing a role in behaviors far removed from human grammar. The entire physical and neural apparatus for language is an aggregation of domain general systems. This distributed architecture stands in direct opposition to the premise of an isolated biological universal grammar. If biology didn't design the specific rules of grammar, we must identify the mechanism that actually generated syntax. Scholars like Michael Tomasello and Salikoko Esmefwene locate that mechanism in ecology and emergence. The cognitive prerequisite for human communication is the theory of mind, the ability to infer and read the intentions of others. This allows for joint attention. Early hominin social cooperation created immense ecological pressure to coordinate actions and share explicit information about their environment. As these societies grew more complex, specific ecological advantages drove vocal speech to outcompete gestural language. Speaking requires less caloric energy, allows communication in complete darkness, and acts as a broadcast mechanism to reach multiple peers simultaneously. To explain how variations become standardized, Muffween developed the feature pool. This graph represents a community of speakers. Every individual possesses a unique idiolect, contributing slight variations into the shared pool. Through iterative interactions, successful communicative strategies are culturally selected, a process known as canalization. Grammatical rules exist as emergent, self-organizing patterns resulting directly from this canalization process. The structure of language is an engineered, collective cultural solution to social pressures, built steadily from the bottom up. The phylogenetic evidence shifts the focus away from syntactocentrism, resolving the friction between the generative and emergentist models. Language evolution was driven by the mind cumulatively domesticating the anatomy over time, rather than a specialized mutation dictating the structure of thought. This explains the vast global diversity of languages, contrasting sharply with Chomsky's claim that typological variation is an illusion. As early human populations dispersed across the globe, they encountered different environments and engineered slightly different communicative technologies to meet specific local pressures. Individual languages operate as complex adaptive systems, continually adjusting to the needs of the populations that host them. This contrasts with classical 20th century structuralist views, championed by figures like Ferdinand de Saussure, which analyze language as a perfectly unified and static entity. In reality, historical population movements, intense language contact, and continuous generational learning keep any language in a state of constant structural modification. Language functions as a cultural technology, a fluid, adaptive framework scaffolded upon millions of years of domain-general evolutionary problem-solving.